corporate communications team at Evergy will be following up with you later today. So with that, I want to give Chuck as much time as possible. I'm going to turn it over to Chuck Casely. Again, he's Senior Vice President, Marketing and Public Affairs and Chief Customer Office for Evergy. Chuck, go ahead.
Thanks, Gina, and for our friends in the media, thanks for coming to the press conference this morning. Obviously, we're experiencing very difficult conditions in Missouri and in Kansas, and so we appreciate the opportunity to discuss that with you this morning. As of right now, Evergy has around just underneath 100,000 customers that have had their power interrupted or turned off as a result of temporary emergency power outages that we initiated on behalf of the Southwest Power Pool. I'm going to give you a full rundown of what is happening, when this started, and what the major causes are, and then I'd be happy to take any questions that folks have. So first of all, this morning, the Southwest Power Pool at 6:45 a.m. informed Evergy that they were declaring an energy emergency alert level 3. This is the second time in Southwest Power Pool's history and the second time in 2 days that they have done this. It is because of unprecedented cold and extended extreme weather that they are experiencing issues on the 17-state region running from Canada all the way down to the panhandle of Texas in maintaining a stable and reliable grid today. So as a result, at 6:45 a.m., the Southwest Power Pool initiated an EEA3 alert, and then at 7 a.m., they gave us the requirement to start reducing our electrical consumption inside the Evergy service territory. Again, that occurred at 7 a.m. So at 7 a.m. this morning, Evergy began to initiate temporary emergency power outages, just like we did from around 12:15 to 1:25 yesterday. This is because the Southwest Power Pool essentially has declared a grid emergency and required us to do that. Again, to this point, about 170,000 customers, or about 10% of Evergy's customers, have been impacted by outages. The first people who were given a temporary emergency power outage have now been restored, and we are going into a second and third block of temporary power outages. There are really 5 factors that are driving the need to initiate temporary emergency power outages today. The first is that this has been the coldest day throughout the SPP and throughout our service territory that we've experienced to date. Temperatures this morning range between -22 and -28 degrees at many of our power plants. And so it's been the coldest of the days so far that we've experienced. The second is the cumulative effect of the long-term or extended cold wave that we've been in. As different machines, power plants, and the grid, as people's homes, cars, and other things that use energy are in the extended cold, they have to use more energy just to stay warm. And so every day that goes by that we're in this kind of extended cold streak uses more energy in the morning as people are starting their morning routines and businesses are opening up. The third thing that has impacted the Southwest Power Pool is that several plants, meaning power plants, went out of operation overnight. We know of plants that have gone down in Iowa and in Oklahoma. And as a result, the Southwest Power Pool is worried about the overall supply to electrical customers within the 17-state region of the Southwest Power Pool. I want to make very clear at this point, this is not a Evergy problem at this point in terms of having enough generation or power supply to meet our customers' demands. Our plants are up and running for the most part. We're experiencing some wind turbines that are not running this morning for a couple reasons, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But we have enough supply to meet our power demand here in this region. It is a concern that the Southwest Power Pool, who runs the 17-state region and controls the 17-state region, is worried about overall power supply. If we do not have enough power supply to supply that 17-state region, what can happen is the grid can destabilize and we can have blackouts, which we define as longer periods of uncontrolled and much larger outages. And so what the Southwest Power Pool and Evergy are trying to achieve is by taking people off in smaller blocks for a temporary emergency power outage, we are hoping to avoid what they're seeing in Texas and other areas of the United States where they're having blackouts and millions of people out for multiple hours and or days. The third or the fourth factor that is impacting us this morning is the fact that there is some transmission congestion on the Southwest Power Pool and within the Evergy system. Just to explain what that is briefly, our transmission systems are our very high-powered lines, and the way to think about those is they're very similar to highways or interstates. They carry big amounts of traffic over long distances, and they're used to deliver power from power plants and across the Southwest Power Pool to population centers. This morning, the Southwest Power Pool informed us that there was significant congestion, or essentially a traffic jam, on many parts of the transmission system, and that further complicates moving power between where it's needed and where it's generated. Some of those transmission congestion situations or traffic jams have actually occurred within the Evergy service territory on our transmission lines. And from what we can tell and what we've been talking about with Southwest Power Pool, that's because a significant amount of energy is flowing from the northern part of the Southwest Power Pool down through our service territory to southern areas that may need more supply to meet their electrical demands. As a result, we have been working with the Southwest Power Pool to alleviate that congestion and get the grid back to normal operations. But that is a fourth problem that is causing issues this morning. And then finally, the fifth problem that is of significant bearing on this morning's demand is that yesterday it was a little warmer and it was also a holiday. So many people weren't at work, many schools were out. This morning we're back to a normal operations footing on top of being the coldest day we've experienced so far. So all of those factors combined is what has caused the Southwest Power Pool to require us to reduce our demand in our service territory and call for these temporary emergency power outages. Right now, we have about 500 megawatts, and again, that's about 100,000 customers that are without power. We are still targeting 30-minute power interruptions when people do have a temporary emergency power outage impact them. But because we have significantly more need to reduce demand today versus yesterday, those times could spread to as much as 60 to 90 minutes. Again, we're hoping to keep the timing around that 30-minute time frame or 60 minutes at the most. But given the fact that many more customers are being impacted simultaneously today, that situation could get a little extended past 30 minutes up to 60 to 90. The news from the Southwest Power Pool is that we should hit our peak demand for the entire 17-state region somewhere between 9 and 10 o'clock today. And given that, we're hoping, cautiously optimistic at this point, that additional temporary emergency power outages should not be needed. Having said that, we expect to keep this level of demand reduction, again, around 500 megawatts, is probably going to extend for the next hour or two, perhaps even longer. A couple of things that I just want to sum up with. First of all, we're doing everything we can to reduce the number of people impacted, and so far it's been right around 10% of our customer base that's been impacted. So still 90% of our customers will not have seen a temporary emergency power outage this morning. Second thing is we're very, very much trying to avoid getting in a situation where the Southwest Power Pool has a larger, longer, uncontrolled outage or a blackout. So that's the primary focus this morning. The third thing is we just remind people that as these temporary power outages occur, One of the things that will be impacted, and since we're no longer in a holiday situation, is traffic lights. So as you're traveling today, we'd like to make sure that people are very cautious as they're going through intersections, because it is entirely possible, if there's been an outage there, that traffic lights will not have had time to reset. The final thing that we would ask is for people to have patience. We know that this is very cold weather. We know that this is extremely frustrating. And believe us, we would not be calling for these temporary power outages if they were not required by the Southwest Power Pool and if they weren't necessary to prevent a larger, longer, more prolonged outage. The best thing to do if you're impacted by an outage at this point is to sit tight. We should have the outage restored within the 60 to 90 minute window. If after 60 to 90 minutes you're still out of power, then we would suggest calling our contact center at this point and reporting the outage, and hopefully they can give you additional information when you do. That's the conclusion of my prepared remarks, and Gina, I'd be happy to take questions now.
Okay, great. We have a few questions. Craig Andrus from KSN in Wichita is asking, what if I'm at the gym or the store and a planned outage will happen?
Well, what I would tell you is if a planned outage happens and it affects the gym or the store that you're in all likelihood, it is going to continue to impact that facility for at least 30 minutes, and it could be more, closer to 60 to 90. So in all likelihood, if you're on the treadmill, that probably means your workout is done for the day. With respect to other facilities, you just have to check with them if they're still able to do business. And again, it shouldn't be a long or extended outage, past the 60 to 90 minute time frame. Also, many businesses and stores have generators so that they'll be able to continue to transact. But it's really a case-by-case basis, and unfortunately, in order to make sure we don't have a larger, longer blackout, these are the things that we're trying to do to prevent that.
Sure. And also from Craig, are we asking major users like city halls, county buildings, and other large facilities to possibly even call off the day or take other measures to conserve?
These are all great questions. And so, yes, a couple of things. One, on Sunday afternoon, we did put out a request to all of our customers, commercial, industrial, and residential, to reduce usage to the extent they can. I know in many areas, we've had exceptional response and assistance from government entities reducing their usage. I also know that in several places, for example, Kansas City, the mayors have asked downtown businesses to turn off lights to lower the temperatures in businesses, and also to reduce outdoor lighting or those beautiful skylines that we like to look at. And we appreciate that. From an industrial customer perspective, we've had great partnership from many of our largest users. I would point to companies like Ford Motor Company, like Occidental Petroleum, like Coffeyville Resources, just to name a few, Nucor in Sedalia. These companies and many, many others have voluntarily reduced a significant amount of their load or their demand in order to help out. And that started yesterday morning and has continued through the day yesterday and today. We really appreciate those businesses assisting, and everybody who's doing this, because in these types of weather, whenever you're shutting down your production facilities, you're risking damage as a result of the cold temperatures to your equipment. And so these are truly civic heroes who are doing their part as well, and we appreciate that. And so that is being done. And then again, just people doing little things like shutting their blinds, lowering their thermostats, and just in general not having lights or equipment on, or running dishwashers, laundry machines, things like that. That all helps as we try and get through this.
Okay. Next question is from Sean, also from Wichita. Has SPP given an indication how long controlled outages will be needed?
Gina, you cut out there a little bit. Could you repeat that question?
So has the SPP given an indication how long controlled outages may be needed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there, in this type of situation, there are really two periods of the day that are of concern, and that's morning time as people start to get up and go to work, and businesses start to to work for the day. So that's generally around 8 o'clock in the morning, all the way till 10:30, 11 o'clock in the afternoon. And then as people start to get home and do all of the things folks do once they get home from work are really the two times when there's likely to be issues. With respect to today, what the SPP has told us is they expect to reach the peak level of the demand on the system, or the greatest amount of electrical demand from the 17-state region, somewhere between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock today. So we are hopeful that if we get through that time period, that controlled outages, will hopefully conclude sometime, around noon or maybe early afternoon. It could be sooner. It really all depends on how the Southwest Power Pool is able to manage power generation and supply for the 17-state region, as well as any transmission congestion or traffic jams that could be out there. Again, that's completely outside of our control. Those are indicators that we are looking for from the Southwest Power Pool. But what they have told us is we are in the critical time period right now as we speak. And hopefully if we get through this next 45 minutes to an hour, we will see some of the temporary outages begin to wind down a little bit and get closer to normal grid operations.
Next question is regarding advance notice. Are customers being provided advance notice of outages, and why not?
That's a fabulous question. I appreciate whoever it is that asked it. Probably the very most frustrating thing that we hear from customers, that we hear from elected officials who are in 24/7 communication with right now, and that we hear from the news media is, can we get notice about when and where these outages are going to occur? And so I really appreciate that question being asked. The short and simple answer is, from a practical perspective, it's almost impossible to tell customers where and when an outage like this is going to occur. The reason for that is because we get very, very little notice on when we have to reduce load and have these temporary emergency power outages. For example, this morning, we got a notification at 6:45 a.m. from the Southwest Power Pool that we were in their highest alert level, meaning an EEA3. And then within 15 minutes, we were required to start reducing the demand in our service territory. Once we get that order to reduce demand in our service territory, we literally have minutes to be able to make the necessary changes to grid operations and reduce that demand. So we're talking a 10 to 15 minute window in order to reduce demand. So we don't know when it's going to occur because that comes very last minute from the Southwest Power Pool. We don't know until we're told how much reduction we're going to need to be able to do. And then once we get that information, what we have to do is we have to look across the entire service territory and look at groups of customers we select groups of customers to meet that level of demand reduction. And then we immediately start calling on those, starting those temporary power interruptions. The only thing in between understanding how much and when we have to do it and actually starting those temporary power interruptions is we try and go through and eliminate any critical infrastructure like hospitals, places where the COVID vaccine is being stored or administered, pumping stations on pipelines for natural gas, for petroleum, and for propane. All of those things we try and take out of any of the temporary power outages. And so from a practical perspective, it literally takes minutes from when we find out we have to do it, how much we need to do, and then take that critical infrastructure out, and then we have to start those outages. So there's really no way that we can tell people where it's going to happen or when it is going to occur. The best thing we can do is to tell people that we're in a period of time where, to prevent a blackout, we have to do it. The second thing is it literally happens all over our service territory. So it's balanced throughout our service territory, meaning it happens in rural and urban and suburban. It happens in Missouri. It happens in Kansas. We don't take blocks of areas all within, say, for example, Wichita, or say, for example, within Lawrence or Kansas City. It's literally all over the states to keep the grid as balanced as possible. And so, and then, these occur for 30 minutes optimally, or 60 to 90 minutes, and then we rotate to another batch of customers. Again, we expect that this could go on yet for another 2 or 3 hours, hopefully a little less.
Do we have an estimate of how many customers may be part of emergency outages today?
So far in our service territory, there's been about 170,000 customers that have had a temporary power interruption in order to avoid a larger blackout. Obviously, as we bring new customers on to a temporary outage and take other customers off, the total number impacted will grow a little bit. We believe that at the end of the day, if things continue the way they are right now, it could be as many as 20%, maybe 25% of our customers, potentially more, depending on how long this lasts, could be impacted by a temporary power outage.
All right. Thank you. A couple of people are asking questions along these lines, so I'm going to try to kind of paraphrase and bring them together. So which locations and blocks can expect outages, and how do you try to avoid areas with critical infrastructure? If you're on one of these blocks, are you trying to notify those customers?
So thanks for those questions. So the first thing is, in preparation for potential temporary emergency power outages, our operations team went through and tried to identify hospitals on circuits, as well as other critical infrastructure. It is not always a perfect situation. So sometimes medical buildings can be interrupted, sometimes hospitals can. We have been in communications with hospitals, though, however, to let them know that temporary power outages are occurring and it could impact them. We have had several situations over the last 48 hours. One in particular I can think of, where we had a vehicle accident that impacted some power poles that actually did cause an outage to a hospital, but that was not related to a temporary emergency power outage. But the bottom line is, we've been doing some work ahead of time to identify critical infrastructure as much as we possibly can. I should be very clear, though. We can't get everybody's definition of critical infrastructure. Everybody that serves a key business function in the community, whether it's schools, whether it is grocery stores, has a critical nature to their service. What we're trying to make sure that we do is protect medical providers during a pandemic, vaccine providers during a pandemic. And one of the issues that is causing this situation for the Southwest Power Pool is access to natural gas on pipelines and other fuels to power both homes, home heating, and power plants. And so we're trying to take out any pumping stations that would exacerbate that problem as well. With respect to communicating, again, we can't tell people ahead of time when it's going to happen, by the very nature of how these things occur, and also by the very temporary nature of them, meaning that it happens within 30 to 60 minutes, hopefully. Usually by the time we would send a communication out, we're starting to get ready to put power back on. So the best thing we can tell people is to try and be patient. We know this is a very difficult circumstance. We know temperatures are extreme. We know that even 30 to 60 or 90 minutes is something that is daunting for people. We would just ask some patience and tell folks that, again, we wouldn't do this if we weren't required to, in order to maintain grid stability from the Southwest Power Pool. And we would not do this if we weren't trying to avoid, in a 17-state region, a more prolonged and uncontrolled outage like they are seeing in Texas, where there's 4 or 5 million people right now that are out of power and could be out of power yet today.
That segues nicely into another question we received. How are we in danger of facing a situation that's more extreme, like is happening in Texas right now?
These are wonderful questions, and really appreciate these great questions. So the very reason that we are doing these temporary emergency power outages is to avoid that very situation, to avoid something like is occurring in Texas right now, where there are millions of people out for 6, 7, 8 hours, some more than a 24-hour period. That gets to be a very dangerous situation across a number of fronts. And so the very reason we're doing this is to avoid that possibility. I would say that the fact that we are taking these extreme measures, and that the Southwest Power Pool is requiring us to take these extreme measures, is evidence that, of course, there is the possibility that could occur. What I would tell you, though, is that by taking these measures and having temporary reductions or temporary outages, we are putting ourselves in a position, hopefully, to ride through this and avoid that situation. As we sit here this moment, it looks like we're in a pretty decent situation to ride this through. But that is the very reason we're taking all of these precautions right now, is to avoid something like that, which we would see as a much more catastrophic situation than interrupting service for a 30 to 90-minute time period.
So from Adam down in Harvey County, I don't think as journalists we've really had a chance to explain how that we're able to shut off a small amount to avoid a larger blackout. Could you help us explain what causes a larger blackout to take place? So,
yeah, absolutely. And these are fabulous questions. So thank you for that question. So the way you should think about the electrical grid is like a plate balancing on a pencil. And you have to have, when people use electricity, they're creating demand. And when people create demand, we have to have supply there in order to meet that demand. If that doesn't happen, then the plate destabilizes and can fall off the pencil. That's a blackout. That's a prolonged, uncontrolled blackout. And essentially what happens is when demand and supply get too out of joint, where there's too much demand and you can't meet it from a supply perspective, or there's so much demand in a particular area, but your transmission system, again, that's the interstate and the highway system of our electrical grid, can't get the power there. What happens is the grid destabilizes and it can crash. So by having these temporary emergency power outages, what we are doing is essentially trying to alleviate the traffic jams and trying to take and make sure that we always have enough supply in the 17-state region, enough power generation to meet the demand of this 17-state region. One of the things that we've heard a great deal about as these cold weather situation is going on, and when temporary power outages started yesterday, is, well, gosh, this, Evergy says, we have enough supply to meet our own demand. So, why are we being impacted by these other states and these other, these other power companies, and why is the Southwest Power Pool doing this to us? And the short answer there is that by having a 17-state region, the entire electrical grid is a lot bigger and a lot more stable. It also gives all of the customers within that region access to more electricity generally. And so for 99 days out of 100, it is a much more stable, much more reliable, and much more cost-effective system. However, in a system that big, if there's a problem one place, there could be a problem that impacts us everywhere. And that's what we're dealing with today, which is over a 17-state region. There are places where power plants aren't able to run because of the cold, or they're not able to run because they don't have access to fuel. And while those things are not impacting us directly here in a way that we can't meet our customers' demand for electricity, it is impacting the Southwest Power Pool as a whole. And so by doing temporary emergency electrical outages, what we are doing is essentially taking load off the grid, like utilities across the 17-state region, in order to make sure that there's always enough generation or electrical supply out there to meet demand. And because we are a large part of the Southwest power pool, about 20% of the entire system is Evergy and our customers and our service territory. We can spread that impact out and try and mitigate the impact to customers as much as possible.
Okay. Another question. So if a customer already has had an emergency interruption, could they be interrupted again?
Great question. And the short answer is you kind of figuratively go to the bottom of the list, meaning you shouldn't get interrupted immediately again. But there are always considerations like making sure the temporary power interruptions that we're doing keep that grid balanced. And so if you're in an area that is needed in order to balance the grid, it could happen a second time. Also, as long as this persists, the likelihood that you could get interrupted again happens to go up. But in general, hopefully, if you're interrupted once, then again, hopefully it's a getting to the bottom of the list kind of thing.
Okay, a couple questions that are related, so I'm going to group them up. How much longer do we anticipate possibly having emergency interruptions, and for how much longer do folks need to try to voluntarily conserve power?
So that, again, great questions. So for today, we are hopeful and have some indication from the Southwest Power Pool that hopefully by early afternoon, if not sooner, we could be out of the situation where we have temporary emergency power outages. That's not a guarantee, but the indication right now from the Southwest Power Pool is that hopefully by later this morning to early afternoon, we should be in a position to be winding down these events. In the larger picture, I would say that we'll probably be asking for energy conservation and for outage preparedness probably through the afternoon and into the evening tomorrow. We're gradually starting to see temperatures warm up a little bit. If anybody's been outside today, they'll see that the sun is finally shining, which is a good thing. But one thing that is true about the Southwest Power Pool is they have one of the largest portfolios of wind generation in the United States. And that wind generation continues to be under some duress. It continues to have issues. There's a high degree of moisture in the air from precipitation over the last week that has caused freezing fog and icing, which is keeping some of the wind turbines from operating. We also have an average wind speed over the last several days of about 8 to 10 miles an hour, which is not enough to really turn a lot of the wind turbines and create electricity. So for our service territory, we are at about 18% of our electricity this morning is being made from wind power, whereas on a normal day like today, it might be closer to about 30-35%. The reason I bring this up is because with such a big portion of the Southwest Power Pool's supply coming from wind, and with icing conditions and lower wind rates right now, that's something that could continue to stress the entire Southwest Power Pool system into the morning and maybe even afternoon tomorrow. We are hopeful by the end of the day tomorrow, though, that we should be through this and getting closer back to normal power operations. Again, barring something that we can't foresee right now occurring.
Okay. While we're on the generation topic, Brian Grimmett from Kansas News Service is asking, what issues has Evergy had with its own generating facilities?
Great question, Brian. Thanks for being on this morning. First, I'll run through some things that we've been experiencing, but I want to repeat and stress, despite issues with many of our power plants, we have managed to, throughout this, continue to have enough supply in order to serve all of the 1.7 million customers in our footprint. So here are some of the things that we've been experiencing. First of all, natural gas, getting access to natural gas and fuel oil to run our peaker power plants, or the power plants that we use when demand is high, has been difficult. The reason for that is there are really two primary pipelines that are serving our service territory, and both of those pipelines have been at capacity for 4 or 5 days now. And so not only are fuel prices extremely high, but it's very difficult to get access to additional fuel. One of the things that exacerbates or makes that even more difficult is the fact that in this region, a significant amount of home heating and business heating is done through natural gas. So you're literally having businesses, homes, and power plants compete for the same very constrained supply. On a coal side, our coal plants have been running very well, but the problem they have had is coal is stored outside and on the ground. And so if you cast your mind back to last week and over the weekend, we had freezing rain and we also had snow. That precipitation gets into the coal pile and then it freezes, and it causes two problems. One is the fact that it becomes like concrete and very difficult to load into coal plants. So it has to be manually broken up and manually loaded. And then the other problem that occurs is it doesn't burn as hot, and so it doesn't make electricity quite as well. So we've been working on that as well as pipes freezing and cooling systems in all of our plants. And then finally, I just remind folks that we talked about wind energy and the problems there. We've had significant icing on many of our wind turbines in western Kansas, which has caused them to freeze up and not to run, or temperatures that are so cold we can't keep the hydraulic fluid in them from becoming viscous and freezing up. And that also hampers wind production. And so with right around 4,000 megawatts of wind power serving our customers, having a significant proportion of that off has been a challenge to deal with. And one of the reasons that we have been running our natural gas and fuel oil plants as much as we have. Having said that, I mean, the men and women who work outside in these extreme temperatures are the real heroes of this event. Folks like me who are sitting at home in a jacket, negative 22-degree weather, and then with a wind chill factor being even worse than that, you know, it's a difficult situation, and they're the real heroes.
Okay, we have a few customer service related questions to turn to now. Let's see. So if customers have medical conditions or medical equipment, are you taking any special measures to communicate with them, or is there any suggestions to how they should manage this?
So I appreciate that. You know, we starting on Sunday and yesterday, we have been communicating with customers who have identified to us that they have medical equipment or medical concerns. There are what we call our medical list customers, and we have communicated them through email and through automated voice messages to them. What I would tell folks, particularly folks who are on oxygen, try and have a temperature